Hello YouTube, I am Dr. Robiul. I work as a lecturer of pathology in a medical college hospital and I am making this video for my students. Hope someone finds this helpful. Okay, now today's topic is ischemia reperfusion injury. To understand ischemia reperfusion injury, I will divide this video into two parts. In the first part, we will discuss briefly about what is ischemia and how ischemia can cause cell injury. In the second part, we will try to discuss what will happen if we try to reperfuse, that is, restore blood flow to an ischemic tissue, and then we will discuss the common mechanisms of reperfusion injury. Okay, so let's begin. First question, what is ischemia? Always remember, ischemia means decrease in blood flow. It can be decrease in arterial blood flow or it can be decrease in venous blood flow. Okay, so ischemia means reduced arterial blood flow or venous blood flow. Regarding the examples of ischemia, there are a lot of examples. I will just mention three examples, but there is a lot of examples. So the first one is in atherosclerosis. I am sure you have heard the term atherosclerosis, that is deposition of lipid particle beneath the tunica intima layer of blood vessel. When lipid particles are deposited beneath the tunica intima layer of blood vessel, the blood vessel's lumen becomes narrow and so there is less blood flow and that will result in ischemia. Another example of ischemia can occur in a patient who is having problem in his or her heart. Okay, there may be reduced cardiac output and that reduced cardiac output can result in ischemia. The last example that I will give of ischemia and then we will move on is about thrombus. Okay, so we know that a thrombus is a solid mass formed in the cardiovascular system from the constituents of streaming blood, mainly platelet, right? So whenever a thrombus is formed inside a blood vessel, that thrombus blocks or partially blocks the blood vessel and that will reduce blood flow and that will result in ischemia. Okay, so now that we have briefly discussed about ischemia and gave some examples of ischemia, now we will discuss the second point, that is how ischemia can cause cell injury. Okay, and to understand that topic, you can see that I have drawn a flowchart here and we have to go through the flowchart. So here you can see I have drawn a blood vessel. You can see these are the endothelial cells in black, and this is a very diagrammatic image. So these are the red, these are the RBC, and you can see here we have some atherosclerotic change beneath the tunica intima of the blood vessel, and that change has narrowed the blood vessel's lumen, right? So beyond that narrowing, we see there will be reduced blood flow, and by definition that is ischemia. So what will happen when there is ischemia to a tissue? So we all know that red blood cell has a lot of function, but the most important function of RBC is to carry oxygen, right? RBC carries oxygen via the hemoglobin molecules contained inside the red blood cell, right? So whenever there is reduced blood flow, then there will be reduced oxygen transport. Okay, and when there is reduced oxygen in the tissue, we use a term that is hypoxia. So you can see I have written hypoxia just after ischemia. So what did we learn so far? Ischemia means reduced blood flow. It can be reduced arterial blood flow or it can be reduced venous blood flow. Whenever blood flow is reduced, RBC is traveling less into the tissue, so there is reduced oxygen in the tissue, and that is known as hypoxia. What is hypoxia? Hypoxia means reduced oxygenation of tissue. And so you can see that ischemia is an important cause of hypoxia. Okay, now a nice thing to know, the examiner may ask you, then what are the other causes of hypoxia besides ischemia? The other causes of hypoxia include hypoxemia and reduced oxygen carrying capacity of the blood. Okay, so that is an important side note that you may write down. Okay, so coming back to the mechanism of ischemia causing cell injury. So first we said there was reduced blood flow, then we said that will result in hypoxia. And always remember, hypoxia is one of the commonest causes of cell injury. And whenever we have reduced oxygen in the tissue, the oxidative phosphorylation that occurs in the mitochondria cannot occur. Okay, and that will result in reduced ATP formation. Okay, now we will pause the discussion here because you may be asking a lot of questions that why hypoxia will result in reduced ATP formation. To understand that question, you can see that I have drawn a mitochondria here. I'm sure you have known a thing or two about mitochondria. Mitochondria has two membranes, inner membrane and outer membrane, and on the inner side of the inner membrane we have the mitochondrial matrix. Okay, now if you can see the image, I have zoomed into this part of the mitochondria and I have drawn that thing in a larger scale over here. So this one is just a zoomed in version of this tiny part of the mitochondria. Now I'm sure you have heard the term electron transport chain. We all need ATP as source of energy, right? And ATP are produced in the inner mitochondrial membrane via electron transport chain. Okay, now to understand that topic further, you can see I have drawn a very simple diagram of the electron transport chain. This is important. In order to understand how cell injury occurs in ischemia, you have to know how ischemia is causing hypoxia and how hypoxia is hampering the electron transport chain. So this is a simple diagrammatic image of the electron transport chain. You can see electron at first enters the electron transport chain when NADH has been oxidized into NAD, and that is done by complex 1 of the electron transport chain, which is also known as NADH dehydrogenase. Okay, so NADH will come into the electron transport chain. It will give electron, I am drawing it like E minus, to the electron transport chain, and the NADH will go back as NAD, and that will be used by other enzymes. Okay, then what will happen? The electron will go from complex 1 to coenzyme Q. Now always remember, coenzyme Q is a lipid particle, okay, lipid molecule. From coenzyme Q, electron will move into another complex in the electron transport chain, which is known as complex 3, also known as cytochrome B C1. And always remember, this is a iron heme protein. From complex 3, electron will then move into cytochrome C. This is also another iron heme protein. And from cytochrome C, this is the place where I want you to focus. From cytochrome C, electron will move into complex 4. It contains copper heme proteins. Okay, and always remember, this is very, very important. This is the place where we need oxygen. You can see on the right side of the complex 4, I have drawn oxygen, and oxygen, after taking electron from the complex 4, will become water. And so that's the reason we need oxygen in the electron transport chain. Okay, and one thing I would like to add regarding the electron transport chain: what happens when electron is passing through these complexes? It creates a proton gradient. You can see hydrogen ions are moved from the inner side. Okay, this was the inner membrane. This was the matrix of the mitochondria, and this side is the outer membrane as well as the cytoplasm. Okay, so we don't demarcate between the outer membrane and cytoplasm when we talk about electron transport chain, because they act as one unit. But we are separating the outer membrane and cytoplasm from the matrix via this inner membrane. Okay, so what happens when electrons are transported through these electron transport chain? They create a proton gradient on the cytoplasmic side. Okay, and the only way these protons can go back into the matrix is via this channel. This is known as F0 F1 ATP synthase complex. Okay, and on the F1 side, this is F0 and this is F1. On the F1 side of this complex, we have the ATP synthase enzyme, and that results in phosphorylation of ADP and makes ATP. Okay, so that was the role of electron transport chain. So we can see that if there is hypoxia, that will result in failure of complex 4 to perform its duty, and that will result in reduced ATP production. Okay, so as you can see, going back to the main image, there was ischemia followed by hypoxia. Hypoxia caused problem in the electron transport chain. If you want to be more specific, then it hampered the complex 4. Okay, and so that resulted in decreased ATP production. Now, whenever we have reduced ATP production, that itself results into three things. The first thing is, in most of the cells inside our body, we have a pump that is known as sodium potassium ATPase pump. As you can see, I have drawn the sodium potassium ATPase pump here. The role of the sodium potassium ATPase pump is to pump out 3 sodium out of the cell and pump in 2 potassium inside the cell. And this is how sodium potassium ATPase pump maintains the normal electrolyte balance. As you know, sodium is higher in the extracellular fluid and potassium is higher in concentration in the intracellular fluid, and that is maintained via the sodium potassium pump. So what will happen when we have a reduced ATP? The sodium potassium ATPase pump, ATPase, note I said ATPase, so that pump was dependent on the energy that came from ATP. So that pump will now fail. As a result, sodium won't get out of the cell, so we will have sodium accumulating inside the cell. Okay, now what will happen then? I'm sure you have heard the term osmosis. You know, osmosis is a condition where fluid goes from low concentration to higher concentration, right? So when sodium is high inside the cell, it will attract water. Okay, so then water will also enter inside the cell, and that will result in cellular swelling. Okay, so that is one mechanism of cell injury in ischemia. The next thing that will happen when we are having hypoxia due to ischemia is we will try to produce energy without the help of oxygen, and that is a process known as anaerobic glycolysis, breaking down energy substrate in the absence of oxygen. Okay, but whenever we will do anaerobic glycolysis, we will produce lactic acid, and that will result in a term known as lactic acidosis, and that will lower the pH of the cell. Okay, and that will result in two things. The first thing is, as we are breaking down glycogen, so there will be reduced glycogen, and there will be chromatin clumping. Okay, chromatin, I am sure you have heard the term. Inside the nucleus we have chromatin, and they will clump when the environment becomes acidic, and we know in acidic environment pH is low, right? So that will result in chromatin clumping. The third thing that will happen when we have decreased ATP due to hypoxia, due to ischemia, is there will be detachment of ribosome from the endoplasmic reticulum. Recall that endoplasmic reticulum, ribosome was attached with the endoplasmic reticulum, and ribosome are the site where our proteins are synthesized, you know. So whenever they are detached from the endoplasmic reticulum, there will be some problem in the protein synthesis. Okay, so this is how ischemia can cause cell injury. Okay, so now that we have understood how ischemia causes cell injury, now we will move on to the second part of today's video, where we will discuss the outcome of reperfusing an ischemic tissue. That is, what will happen if we restore blood flow in a previously ischemic tissue. Okay, now always remember there may be three outcomes, and one of them is the reperfusion injury. Okay, so what are the outcomes that can happen if we restore blood flow to an ischemic tissue? If the tissue was damaged reversibly, okay, there was damage due to ischemia, but the damage did not cross the point of no return. So if the cell or the tissue is reversibly damaged, then if we restore blood flow, the tissue will recover. So that is the first outcome, that the tissue may recover if we reperfuse the tissue. The second outcome is, if the tissue was irreversibly damaged due to ischemia, it may be due to a prolonged ischemia, you know, the tissue was deprived of blood for a long time, okay, then there will be irreversible damage. The damage has crossed the point of no return. So in an irreversibly damaged cell, if we restore blood flow, those tissues' outcome will not change. It will be as it was before, and the outcome is they will die. They will die either via necrosis or apoptosis. Now the third outcome is the reperfusion injury, and it is seen in some cases whenever we restore blood flow to an ischemic tissue. The restoration of blood flow further damages the ischemic tissue, and sometimes it accelerates the damage of the ischemic tissue. Okay, and that is known as ischemia reperfusion injury. So now that we have discussed all these topics, now we are ready to define ischemia reperfusion injury. Now don't get scared. I know a lot of my students tend to run away whenever I try to teach them definition, but you know, you need to know this in order to get good marks in your written examination. So don't get scared. Look, I am even showing you a teddy just to keep you calm. Okay, so here it goes, the definition of ischemia reperfusion injury. But if you have listened to all the things I said previously attentively, I'm sure you will understand this definition smoothly. So, definition. Under certain circumstances, when blood flow is restored to cells that have been previously made ischemic but did not die, the injury sometimes paradoxically exacerbates and proceeds at an accelerated pace. As a consequence, the reperfused tissue may sustain loss of cells in addition to the cells that were irreversibly damaged at the end of ischemia. Okay, so I hope you're still here, you didn't run away. And so now that we have defined ischemia reperfusion injury, now we will move on to the next topic, and that is why ischemia reperfusion injury occurs. So ischemia reperfusion injury can occur in mainly 4 mechanisms. The first one is new damage via oxygen free radicals. The second mechanism is by promoting mitochondrial permeability transition via those oxygen free radicals. The third mechanism is inflammation, and the fourth mechanism of ischemia reperfusion injury is via the complement pathways. Okay, and so we will discuss these things briefly. So the first one was new damage. So whenever we are having ischemia, there is reduced blood flow to that tissue, and that will result in damage in those cells. The mitochondria of those cells will also get damaged, and that will result in incomplete reduction of the oxygen, and that will result in formation of different oxygen derived free radicals, which are also known as reactive oxygen species. Okay, another thing, whenever there is cell injury, there is release of an enzyme that is known as oxidase. It is released from the parenchymal cell, from the endothelium of the blood vessel, and also sometimes from the infiltrating leukocytes that came to give us protection. So leukocyte, endothelial cell and parenchymal cell, they are releasing oxidase, and that will also result in formation of free radical or reactive oxygen species. And there is a scavenging system inside our cell that tries to remove those free radicals so that they cannot cause any harmful effect. And whenever we are having ischemia, those free radical scavenging system or antioxidants, they are also reduced. Okay, so it is also written in your text that if we can give free radical scavengers, that can have some therapeutic benefit when we are trying to deal with ischemia reperfusion injury. Okay, one important side note that you have to know: what is free radicals? Free radicals are chemical species that contains single unpaired electron in their outer orbit. They are very unstable substance, and they can derive from a lot of source. One of the sources is oxygen. When oxygen is partially reduced, they can result in formation of different free radicals, say for example superoxide anion. Okay, so that was all about the first point, how new damage can cause reperfusion injury. When we restored blood flow, a lot of blood came back to the tissue, a lot of blood carried a lot of oxygen inside the hemoglobin of the red blood cell, and those oxygen, they formed free radicals because there was defective mitochondria and there was diminished antioxidants, and also there was oxidase enzyme that came from leukocyte, endothelial cell and the parenchymal cell. So all these things resulted in increased reactive oxygen species or free radicals formation, and that resulted in injury. The second mechanism of ischemia reperfusion injury is linked with the first mechanism. Always remember, the reactive oxygen species, they promote mitochondrial permeability transition. That is, they make the permeability of mitochondria increase, and as a result a lot of harmful things will leak out from the mitochondria and they will cause cell injury. Recall that from my apoptosis lecture that you can see in my YouTube video. Mitochondria, inside the mitochondria we had cytochrome, and sometimes when those things are leaked out they can promote apoptosis. Okay, so that was the second mechanism. The third mechanism by which ischemia reperfusion injury can occur is via inflammation. Okay, now one thing I would like to add regarding the free radicals and mitochondrial permeability transition, I have a separate video that is titled Cell Injury Part 2, and if you want to know about the mechanisms in detail regarding the reactive oxygen species and mitochondrial permeability transition, then you can go through those videos, because I skipped the detail or else this video will become 2 hours long. Okay, so the third point was inflammation. Now whenever we are having inflammation, that will cause cell injury in several ways. One of the mechanism is via cytokines. When there is inflammation, different types of cytokines are released and they can cause cell injury. The second mechanism is whenever there is ischemia, the parenchymal cells and the endothelial cell, they increase expression of adhesion molecule on their surface. It's like they're trying to attract neutrophil to come and help them, and when there is increased expression of those adhesion molecule on their surface, that will attract neutrophil and other types of leukocyte, and they will result in inflammation, and that will cause cell injury. The fourth mechanism by which ischemia reperfusion injury can occur is via the complement pathway. Now normally complements are very important for our host defense, and always remember, it is seen that sometimes immunoglobulin M's are deposited in ischemic tissue, but for some unknown reason, if we restore blood flow to an ischemic tissue, it is sometimes seen that complements bind with those IgM that were deposited inside the ischemic tissue, and they get activated and they result in cell injury. Okay, so that was the fourth mechanism of cell injury due to ischemia reperfusion injury. Okay, so before concluding, I would like to add one more thing. When you will be studying about transplant, organ transplant, you will hear a term that is graft failure or graft rejection. Okay, and sometimes it is linked to this reperfusion injury. Okay, so always keep that in mind, that reperfusion injury, ischemia reperfusion injury can even result in graft rejection in transplant patient. Say for example, a patient received a kidney from a donor, but before receiving the kidney was in an organ container, right? So at that time it was having reduced blood flow, right? So there was ischemia. So after we transplanted the kidney, there was reperfusion of that kidney, you know, inside the recipient's body, and sometimes that can also result in reperfusion injury. Okay, so this is in short about ischemia reperfusion injury. I hope you will go through your textbooks and look at different images and flowcharts for more information. So that's all for today. I will try to make and upload a new video on aplastic anemia, hopefully within a week. So I hope this was helpful. Take care. Thank you.